Hello and welcome to How to Be a Better DM. I'm Tanner Wayland and I'm here with Justin Lewis. Hey, Justin.
Hey Tanner.
Hey, you know what? It's always great to have a little duo show, a little duo podcast.
Yeah.
Talk the talk, shoot the dice, so to speak. But yeah, just glad to be here with you, Justin. So, we are talking today about a special topic. It's alignment, and it's very divisive. When we were actually reaching out to some people wondering, like, hey, do you have any questions? Do you have any topics you'd like to talk about? Someone didn't have so much a question as they had an essay, which we really appreciate. Captain Relic, the Brass Dragon, you know who you are, and they were expressing some strong thoughts about alignment, and it kind of made us realize, we could dive more into that and how alignment can be useful, how it can be restrictive, and we'll get all into that. Justin, just to open this up though, what has been your experience with using alignment or having your players use alignment?
Yeah. So obviously my experience has changed a little bit. First thing I'll say is that I like to use alignment, and I'm going to talk about when we get to how to do this right, some ways that I think you need to do, otherwise it comes across as useless or just not even used. But I think I like to use alignment personally because like that's just kind of the person I am. That's a little bit of how I look at the world. So when it comes down to it, I think my experience with alignment is based on me as a person, and I think that's going to be very similar for every DM out there, right? Whether you use alignment or not, it's probably going to be based on your personal taste outside of the game.
Yeah, that's great. I think for me, kind of same. Personal taste has been the main factor. I actually was thinking about alignment recently because I ran a game for some family members in December, and it was kind of a last minute thing, and I was throwing together. I was using the I believe it was fastgenerator.com or something. It's one of those quick character generators, and like as part of that you can choose alignment, and I just kind of did a random assortment, mostly leaning good, but there was a couple neutrals in there, not thinking much of it, right? uh, but then one of the person, like, it was her first time playing D&D, and she was very excited, uh, and she just she like really dug into the fact that her character was, I believe, chaotic neutral. um and so like she was a merchant, and she like did some truly questionable things, like that, like I guess from a certain point of view could be viewed as neutral. Like she wasn't like fully on board with the party who were mostly good, and at one point she pushed a tree over, like a Christmas tree over on them, and tried and like dashed away to another room to basically just escape and do her own thing. And I was like, wow, I didn't think that she would care much about that alignment. And yet it like made for some very specific choices. And I think that's one of the things that I realized about alignment, um, is that it can give players who are new to role playing or who would like to role play and maybe just need a bearing. It gives them that starting point, you know?
Absolutely. And I think um, it can almost be a permission, right? For those people who are maybe more reserved, but they get, like you said, a character who's chaotic neutral, and suddenly they are doing things that are much more chaotic, right? Um,
Yeah.
and it's the common thing that players say to DMs. It's what my character would do, and this is just another aspect of the character that can either make or break your role play.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, and even within that, it tries to be, just to go back to a little bit of a simpler question of like what is
Mm.
alignment in D&D 5e. It's pretty broad.
Mm-hmm.
the boxes, there are 9 different categories, and most of you have probably heard of these, right? Like good, neutral, evil on one axis, and then lawful, neutral, chaotic on the other. So you'd have lawful good, like a paladin who is always following the rules and like chooses to do good, right? In his own mind. Chaotic good being, oh, they generally do good stuff, but like, oh man, they're wacky. And they don't necessarily like follow the rules, but they aren't trying to be malicious, right? Whereas chaotic evil is like, no, no, they do evil things and they don't care what the rules are. Whereas a lawful evil would be more like, oh, they're evil. They're, this count ruling the land who's very oppressive, but he does care for laws and he cares for, things like that. So as you can see, it's like, okay, it's kind of weird in some ways. It's good in some ways where it's like, hey, it hits two main things. It's like good or evil or neutral. Like morally, where do they fall? And then lawful versus chaotic, it's like, hey, are they rule keepers or rule breakers? Uh, but as we'll talk about later, this system can feel very simplistic, just as is. You know?
I agree. And I think one of the, a couple of the difficulties. Oh, I see we have Straw in the audience. Hey, Straw, how's it going? If you are there and you have questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. For the audience, the audio listener, we're actually recording this live within our Discord, which is like one of the first times we've ever done this. So this is kind of a new experience for us. So we took off the training wheels. We're probably going to fall over. But we're going to do the best we can. So if you do have questions, Straw, go ahead, or comments, actually, go ahead and put it in the chat, and I'm checking out the chat. But I think there are two issues with how or what alignment is. And I think the first one is that alignment, as far as 5e is concerned, and for most D&D, as far as I'm aware, is self-defined, right? It's not like a god says you are chaotic good or chaotic neutral, right? But from a certain point of view, especially as it regards, your outward actions, it could also be externally defined. And I think that's where people have some issue. And then from there, I think the second problem is that, and just thinking about our own moral systems, right? We all have ideals that we try to live up to, but we also have past that kind of defines us a little bit. So in one way, alignment can be both descriptive and prescriptive. So it can be used to describe all of your actions and intents up to this moment, or it could be used, or it could be used to describe the ideals that you're trying to live up to, essentially like what you believe in, what you would like to be. And I think with all of that, it gets really murky.
Yeah, but it can be murky, but also it can be a great story tool if you actually do lean into it. And I think this is where alignment sometimes is underutilized. Uh, because I think if players took their alignment seriously, then it helps put bounds around what they might do. It helps them role play their character better, right? Because if they are lawful neutral, then while neutral doesn't give a lot, it's like, hey, kind of gives them some flexibility, but we know that they're lawful, and so they're not just going to do crazy things. And that gives the player something to think about. But if they suddenly start acting a little bit more chaotic, and if they suddenly start acting a little bit more self-centered, then it's like, oh, are they neutral? Uh, and but like a DM has to be the one to broach that subject because most of the time the players won't. Like if they kind of start going full murder hobo on everybody, even though they describe themselves as like a paladin who fought for justice, or whatever. Uh, if they start acting against that, if a DM just kind of lets it slide, then essentially them having that alignment on the player character sheet it's just clutter. It's just something worth ignoring. But if you actually address that and be like, hey, so uh, you go to your church and the paladin's like, hey, I've heard a lot of the clergyman says to the paladin, I've noticed that you have, I've heard rumors. Like, what's going on, my son? That kind of thing. I think that it could be an interesting story tool if utilized well. Um, but on the other hand, like people don't use it, or they use it in such a stereotypical way, right? Uh, like for example, that was one of the big complaints from Captain Relic in Discord, was that one, good and evil can feel very subjective depending on which framework you're coming from, right?
Yeah, or who the victor
Like
is, I guess you could say sometimes.
exactly, right? Like a rebel group, like Star Wars,
Yeah,
the
or the United
rebellion. We
States, you know?
Yes, exactly. Like for the United States, depending on which side you were on, they were either the best thing since sliced bread, or they just caused a lot of harm to you and your people. So it's kind of the thing where, hey, you need to keep that in mind. That like as much as you want to use alignment, don't be super stereotypical with it. Um, and if you do, just realize you're missing out on an opportunity to create a more in-depth story. Um, but second, like their issue was like, hey, sometimes it makes people, all goblins are evil, all witches are evil, all hags are evil, and all elves are just delightful, unless of course they have dark skin, at which point they're evil.
Yeah.
It's a kind of weird situation that some people just take for granted. And I think that it does. I mean, that has a place for some people. Some people want, meat and potatoes D&D. You have dungeons, you've got dragons, you got warriors, you got wizards. You want everything just how it should be in a fantasy world. Very, very Tolkien-esque,
Mm-hmm.
But then for other people, that can get very stale. It can feel very limiting. So that's where I think if you want to make a very interesting story, especially when it comes to races and standard stereotypes, play around with that. Uh, as much as personally, I'm a religious person, I think playing with that and having a religious figure actually be secretly evil and or chaotic, because a chaotic, clergyman could be hilarious.
Yeah. You obviously have good taste. I mean, you listen to How to Be a Better DM, after all. We thank you so much for your support. And if you've ever gotten anything useful from How to Be a Better DM, take a minute and rate us and review us on your podcast listening app of choice. It goes a very long way to helping our show help many more dungeon masters out there who are just like you. If you love our content, help others become better dungeon masters too.
We all have strengths and weaknesses as DMs, but that's why I appreciate our sponsor, worldsmith.io. If you're not confident making a map quickly, use their map generator. Or maybe you're much better at making new characters than you are creating a new NPC or monster stat block. Don't worry about that either. It has separate generators for each of those. I even made an evil reindeer mini-boss for my holiday-themed campaign. The same is true for items, quests, traps, and more. Whatever you don't feel confident in creating, or whatever you don't have time to create on the fly, you can use worldsmith.io's generators to bring your D&D campaign to the next level, which, as you know, is what our podcast is all about. Check out sessionzerostudios.com/worldsmith-podcast to learn more and support our show. Link is in the description.
Spoiler alert, we are building an army. That's right. We're building an army of amazing dungeon masters who want to make the world of D&D a better place. If you want to join our army and fight by our side against the evil forces of boredom and bad DMing, join our Discord and lend your voice to the cause. Go to sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and join for free today. That's sessionzerostudios.com/Discord and enlist in the fight against boredom.
I think that kind of thing provide some interesting story avenues, you know?
100%. I think particularly because D&D does involve these magical pantheons, people get magic from divine beings. Um, that is one of the richest areas to involve alignment, right? If you are following a god, that god, you know, is likely going to have some sort of alignment, right? They are it's possible they could be evil, they could be good. It's possible that the god may not have alignment. But as one of their followers, you will likely match your alignment to them, or your alignment won't match, which will provide interesting conflict for your story. So I think like one of the biggest tips for alignment is you need to match the use of alignment to the game and the party. And one example of this is going back to our conversation with the Kids Table D&D, which was one of our last podcast episodes. They have a rule at their table, and that's they play with kids, right? And they're trying to do something very specific with their games. And one of that rules is we are the heroes. So logically, that means everyone at the table is either neutral or good. No one's evil. And for me, I think that's a very valuable tool for the DM who can kind of keep his party along the same lines, right? You can tell your party or ask them, what kind of game do you want? And based on that, this may not work for every DM, but for certain tables, you can stipulate, hey guys, we're going to be neutral or good. And if you start doing evil things, that's going to have consequences, right? Because this table, we want to be the heroes, or we're the villains, you know? And again, it has to match the table. It has to match the party. But I think using alignment in this way, you can sort of start some party cohesion in just general basic moral standards, right? People don't view killing people randomly the same in certain parties, and that can be very hard when people start becoming murder hobos, like you said. But then there's that one, and actually a great book that I like is called NPCs, and in it, it's a lit RPG book, but there's a party. Three of the characters are played by the classic murder hobo types, right? There's the rogue who likes stealing everything. There's the wizard who likes blowing everything up. And then there's the barbarian who just wants to chop and kill everyone. And then the fourth player is a newbie. And he rolls a paladin, and he wants to be a good paladin. And through the course of the book, that fourth player just doesn't have that much fun because the party is misaligned. And I think that could be, even outside the game, kind of a useful way to use alignment for party cohesion.
Yeah, I agree. I think addressing the differences between the characters and their goals is important because, like you said, otherwise it feels like there's going to be a split in the party where some people are like always trying to do one specific type of activity. And oftentimes it's like, hey, these characters are very self-serving in terms of like they're robbing people without, any compunction. I think that's the right word. They are, they're beating anybody who gives them a sideways glance, right? Whereas these people are like, oh my goodness, someone stubbed their toe. To them, help. And I think that can frustrate both parties.
Yeah.
So having them agreed is a great way to do it. Another way that I think is a bit better is to go a little bit deeper. Personally, I think that the alignment system is good if used well. It's not great. If you want it to be great, you need to have your players think a little bit more deeply. So let's say that they think they are chaotic good, right? Maybe something you could do is present some questions to them that's like, okay, who does your character care about a lot? What would they do for that person? Would they kill for that person? Would they, something like that, or just ask them some questions like, hey, what is this person's motto? Just something. Basically, the alignment framework is just a framework, and you should probably hang other things on that to help the character describe who they are. A better way to probably do that is at the start of a campaign, if you have characters, because with a one shot it doesn't work as well. You kind of want them to be defined, slash, even if it's not defined, players are going to do what they're going to do, right?
Yeah.
But with a
One shot's gonna one
campaign,
shot. Yeah.
well, exactly. But with a campaign, players have the opportunity to really develop a character. And that's where alignments can be interesting and where you can see how they shift, because that they should change over the course of the campaign, and that change should be informed by their actions. But at the start of a campaign, I would recommend that you provide some, like, a variety of choices that are kind of maybe disguised, maybe not as disguised, moral quandaries, so to speak, right? Uh, Questions where it's like, oh, there's a chance for them to basically uh, take advantage of someone for their own benefit, or there's a chance for them to do something selfless for someone. Whatever it is, if you throw out a couple of those scenarios early on, then you can kind of gauge where their character is, and then keep that in mind as the campaign goes, and look for times where they deviate from what they've previously done. I think that that's a nice way to kind of, even if they don't know, or even if they might be mistaken, you yourself are keeping track of that, so you can bring it up to them later and be like, hey, your character or this NPC has noticed that your character is going kind of AWOL, right?
Yeah. And to add to that, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with asking your players for both their descriptive and prescriptive alignment. Right? So a good example is in my personal campaign, my wife is a rogue who is chaotic neutral, right? I essentially tricked her into picking up a cursed weapon. And after working with that weapon for a certain amount of time and killing a certain number of beings with that weapon for a certain amount of time, also she became a werewolf, her alignment shifted to evil. And because of that, I basically said people generally mistrust you. You seem... I was using the rules, not the rules, but like some of the minor effects that you might see on like Knights of the Old Republic, if you've ever played that game. For those of you who haven't, it's a Star Wars game. It's awesome game, both Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. And there's this mechanic in there where you can essentially move yourself along the spectrum of the dark side to the light side of the Force. And the closer you get to either end, the more you kind of personify an avatar of the dark side or the light side. So you become dark, your eyes become like angry all the time. People, just, you can sense it. And then on the light side, you become a lot lighter. So I was kind of playing around with that. And my wife, she mentioned that her character doesn't want to be this way. Her character wants to be good. And I essentially told her, yeah, okay, you can do that, but it takes consistent actions to change your descriptive alignment. And that was her prescriptive, what she wanted to be, what she was trying to live up to, versus her descriptive. And I think that's a great way or a great time to work through some emotional growth in the character, right? Like, why does the character want to change? Well, they had these bad experiences, and they showed this character that I keep doing this stupid stuff and putting other people's lives in jeopardy, and these people I kind of actually care about, And there are ways for you to create these emotional pivot points in the character's development, right?
Yeah, that's a great. I like that a lot, because there's a lot of stories, especially in fantasy, of someone being influenced by something and that turning them evil, so to speak, right? Or giving them cravings. Like someone turns into a werewolf or a vampire, suddenly, like, yeah, they're same person, but they have this big urge. And then if they act on that, if they can't hold that back, then that does inform who they are, even though it's like it kind of muddies the water, so to speak. So I think just as we're ending here, let's, if you have any tips for how to use alignment well and how to use it to tell a better story, please go in. But For me, one thing that I'd like to throw out is, as I said earlier on, it's really good for new players. For new players who aren't used to role playing and who might just be like, oh, this is fantasy world, I'll lean into the murder hobo of it all, which I think is like when it's a fantasy world where most of the mechanics, let's be honest, are about fighting.
Hmm.
It's kind of like, if all you have is a hammer, every problem in the world looks like a nail, right?
Yep.
I think that's the thing with D&D where for most people it looks like a very aggression, fight, combat um, developed system, and it is in many ways. And so for a lot of people, the murder hobo isn't like, oh, it's because they're moralless monsters. It's because no, that's what the game system. If you aren't used to it, that's kind of an easy, natural like end to that sentence, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that for new players, giving them the framework of hey, lawful good, chaotic good, neutral, evil, that kind of thing, it can give them it can give you a chance to remind them if they're kind of swaying, and you can remind them in very good storytelling ways, right? Where you're like, so as you're about to do this, you think about your father saying, um, I would never raise my fist to another person. You can like throw in things to remind them, like, oh, right, this isn't how I self-describe my character. Um, so I think for new players, very useful. And in fact, if they're not totally used to the whole role-playing thing, I would recommend it.
Yeah. I love that so much. I do think it is a highly useful tool for new players, especially ones that don't necessarily seem like the type of player or the person who would play D&D, right? Like they're giving it a shot. Definitely use that framework to help them inform how they should, well, how they can role play more effectively. And other tips I would say is if you are unsure of whether or not to use it and you don't have any definite plans within your campaign, I would say don't worry about it, right? Just like dig more into the players' backstories or whatnot. It's just one other thing that you'd have to think about. On the other hand, if you are going to include alignment like you want to, I would make sure that there are elements within your story that make it matter, right? So whether that's including items that only certain alignments can use, or other effects similar to, like I mentioned, Knights of the Old Republic, or I think another game is Fable, where you can get access to certain individuals a little bit easier based on your alignment. I think that is also really fun. Essentially adding in mechanics and or story elements that are driven by alignment. And definitely if your plot line is going to involve deities at all, alignment could be big, right? So for example, actually, I don't know if I should say that. It might be a spoiler. I don't know if they're listening. I won't share that. But let's say a god calls someone to do a mission, right? But that someone follows their church but doesn't have the same alignment, same belief, or even the god just doesn't care and they call him. That might be an interesting conflict because that person then has the choice of whether to rebel against that god or to follow the edicts and then essentially do something that they don't believe in, right? And like how that all interplays. So again, use mechanics or story elements, but also talk to your players and gauge their interests. And I think those are probably the best ways to go about it.
Yeah, and I think that if you've tried your hand at using alignments as they are in D&D 5e, and it's not working for you, consider using another system.
Mm.
Uh, like, for example, some systems they focus more on relationships than they do on morals, which I think is very valid.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're talking about the bonds that your character has, I mean, even in our lives, a lot of what we think is good and what we spend our time doing is defined by our relationships, right?
Mm.
And so, like, having them describe, hey, who is important to them, that can be big. Having them like have a character's personal motto that can be, it's kind of like a mission statement. It can really frame how they view the world. Same with, some systems have ideals, uh, like Pathfinder. This was mentioned uh, in that post, but they have edicts and anathema, which is basically edicts are they are things that are personal and important to the character. Basically, what they strive to do. Those are the edicts. Anathema are things they would never do, um, and so you can kind of play with that. I think giving, it also makes quests more interesting if you make kind of a gray area, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's why I was thinking that, like, hey, if you're doing a quest, don't make it always as simple as bad guy doing bad things to good people. Sometimes make it so, like, hey, you're not entirely sure, or the way that you would have to deal with the bad guy actually hurts some good people, or it's through bad means. You know, unless they like did the harder way but the better way morally, right?
Yeah.
Uh, Also, I think having your villains consider themselves good and just is probably the best way to have an interesting villain. So keep that in mind as well.
I will say though, to that point, like you got your devils who know they are evil, right? You got your
Sure.
demons who, frankly, they know they're evil, but they don't care what evil and good is. Well, no, they do care, but like I think there's a full spectrum, right? And
Yeah.
there are a lot of really interesting villains that are like, no, I am lawful good, right? Like Thanos. I think you could make the case that he, if he wins and things turn out right, maybe he is lawful good in the end, right? Maybe he becomes the benevolent king, or I don't know, right? And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the fun things about alignment and D&D in general is that it is the spark of questions that you can ask as the DM that then your players can answer via actions in the game. And then the story is that answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think uh, how characters act is the thing that you should really be playing off of.
Mm-hmm.
Because just deciding alignment is like a quarter of it. The other three-fourths of it are, okay, how are they acting and what are their results? And do you, as the DM, make it obvious that they should be reflecting on how their view of themselves and their actions differ or align? And I think that adds a lot of realism to the story and makes it more interesting in the end. But thank you, Justin. I think this has been, you know, for all of you out there who are still like, I don't know about alignment. Guess what? Us too. I think alignment is a useful tool when you want it to be,
Yeah.
and there are interesting ways you can use it. But it's also, I mean, it's there's no number associated with it, right? You can't min max alignment, and you also can't. There isn't a right way to tell a story that uses alignment. You know, people have done all sorts of things. They made a like, oh, a demon that's actually a pretty good guy, or oh, that's an angel who thinks they're really good, but they're really just super haughty and they look down on everybody.
Yeah.
Even if they don't technically do anything bad. I think that there's a lot of ways you can use it, but if you don't want to use it, no worries. I still recommend that you have characters reflect on their actions, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Also, I will admit when you said an angel is just super hottie, I thought you were meaning like they were a hottie.
Nope.
And I was like, yeah, if I was a hottie, I'd probably be evil too. So, it is what it is.
You heard it here first. Anyone who's good out there, just because you're not hot enough, apparently. Um,
I love it.
oh gosh. Okay. Well, um, I guess final thoughts, Justin.
Final thoughts. I think alignment can be really fun if done right. Um, like I said, look to games that have done it right. Uh, you know, Knights of the Old Republic, Fable, things like that. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. There are lots of games where they haven't used them. Lots of actual play shows. Um, and hopefully, after all is said and done, hopefully you are good. Whatever that means to you.
No. Whatever it means to us. Be good according to us.
Yes, be good. Don't kill people and steal their stuff.
Yes, and that's it. That's all we have for being good. There you go.
That's it.
You're scotch free, scot free.
Scotch
if you
tape.
just don't do this. You're scotch tape.
Love it.
As Straw just said, be good or very, very hot.
Yes.
Yeah, that's. You know what? Let's roll initiative. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go. Boom.
Okay, no, but for reals. Love you all. Thanks for listening, and until next time, let's roll initiative.
Brought to you by Session Zero Studios. For more information, visit sessionzerostudios.com.